5.3. My name is Tim Wong See. Sitting across from me now is the Mayor of Noosa, Tony Wellington. Good morning.
Hey, Tim, great to be here.
Happy New Year.
Likewise. Let it be a bumper new year for everyone.
It's going to be a very big year. And if you've got a question for the Mayor of Noosa, call right now. He's not here for that long, so get in quick. 1300 903 222, 1300 903 222, or you can text as well, 0487 993 222. As we look to, you were here in December, last time in December. A lot has happened since then, nationally, of course, with the bushfires, and I think that's probably a good place to start.
Sure.
Mayor, what's it been like for you looking at what's happened around the country, knowing what we've experienced in our community here with the bushfires?
Well, I think the salient point, the take-home point is that we are looking towards a new normal in terms of climate. And that's been certainly proven by many experts, including a large bevy of former fire chiefs, the ones that attempted to talk to the Prime Minister. Also, Ross Garnaut, if you recall, in 2008, said that by 2020 we would be experiencing more intense and longer fire events. Well, 2019, and there we had it. You know, the fires in Noosa began in the beginning of September, which is unheard of for us, and with a ferocity that we've never experienced and our local fire teams have never experienced. So what this means is that for local government everywhere is that we now need to get our heads around the implications, both in terms of our responsibility towards safety, but also what mitigation methods we might now look at. And people simplistically say, oh, you need to do more hazard reduction burning. Sometimes they say back burning, which is not the right terminology. But they say you need to do more hazard reduction. But in fact, there are areas in New South Wales and South Australia that had received hazard reduction burns that also burnt during the fires. And that's because in extreme and catastrophic events, no amount of back burning or hazard reduction burning, I should say, is necessarily going to prevent them. And indeed, there was an interesting study by Wollongong University a few years ago that noted that hazard reduction burning has an impact under normal conditions of about 10% in preventing fires. So, it's one of the tools. We need to learn from traditional owners about how we better do that back burning. I think there's some real learning to do there. But we also need to be looking at other things. That's with regard to our planning scheme. It's with regard to fire breaks, fire access, and also just preparedness on behalf of the community.
Local government elections coming up this year. You've already said that part of your re-election commitment will be, in your words, rethinking the approach to fire in the Noosa Shire. That has many aspects to it. You mentioned negotiations with, First Nations people, something that David Fletcher, who's a Noosa councillor candidate in this year's upcoming elections, has also talked about as well, and the need for that. Is that something that you'll be looking at as Mayor?
Oh, absolutely. And we're already discussing it. And what we've discovered elsewhere, particularly in New South Wales, is that the approach that firefighters and fire managers and parks associations, etc., have been using is a fairly blunt approach to hazard reduction burning. The traditional approach, we've had a tendency to congratulate ourselves and say we're emulating what traditional owners have done for thousands of years. In actual fact, when you talk to traditional owners who understand that history, it's a much more nuanced approach they've been taking to hazard reduction burning, and it relates to testing the amount of moisture in the soil. It differs depending on the vegetation in different areas, etc. The other problem, of course, with hazard reduction burning is that our window for being able to carry it out is shrinking. Now that we've got fire season starting so early, we can really only carry out hazard reduction burnings in winter and under the right fire condition, under the exact right climatic conditions to allow them to occur safely. Remember, three New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service personnel were killed some years ago in a hazard reduction burn. So it's not a safe thing to do. You also are, of course, creating more smoke hazard, and it does have to be managed effectively. If we can get more information from traditional owners about how better to carry that out, then we can be more effective in our approach.
Could you detail perhaps what some of those conversations are looking like at the moment? You mentioned they're underway and you're doing that already. You mentioned the kind of conversations that have had in other parts of the country with that. But say in the Noosa Shire, where's that up to at the moment?
Well, I mean, we're gathering information at the moment and looking at the information that is being gathered elsewhere. I have yet to make direct contact with our local Kabi on the subject, and although I have spoken with one of the Kabi applicants about this issue and warned them that I do want to raise it with them, it may be we need to get that traditional owner understanding from elsewhere as well. But more than that, obviously within the disaster management group, we're talking about the future of fire management, and we're particularly concerned about the sort of developments that had once been allowed to be approved, which are surrounded by bush and which have only one single access in and out. We really need to focus on those areas and create dedicated management plans specifically for those sort of developments. We also have to look at the Shire, and this is part of the work we'll be doing, and find out where there are houses that are particularly vulnerable and work out how it is that we're going to best manage them.
If we say, for example, when we were speaking to you about in the aftermath of the Peregian fires, and about the kind of changes that potentially need to happen in the planning scheme to accommodate some of the changes you've talked about, would you have been of the mindset even back then that some things in the planning scheme would need to change to, say, better accommodate fire management, or say even after what we've seen around the country, you have a different view about that and how urgent this change needs to happen?
Absolutely. At the moment, we've got a dedicated officer working on a climate change adaptation plan. And that will feed into this whole issue as well, and will foretell some changes that are required to the planning scheme. We, of course, have hazard mapping, including fire mapping in the planning scheme, but that was based on the knowledge we had to date. We now have new knowledge. We now understand that the conditions are changing and changing quite rapidly, which means we do now need to go back and review our fire hazard overlays in the planning scheme. We also need to review our approach to approving development in certain areas that may be hazardous with regard to fire. So I think that there will be changes to the planning scheme anyway as a result of our coastal hazard adaptation plan, our climate change adaptation plans, and within that we will have to look at fire quite closely.
Okay, so people can expect some consultation, information on that, changes in and around things like development in rural areas coming up from Noosa Council, say, this year.
Absolutely.
To accommodate that. Okay.
Definitely.
The Mayor of Noosa is here on ABC Sunshine Coast. Thanks for being here. 1300 903 222, 1300 903 222 the number, or 0487 993 222. If we talk about the $1 million that was given to Noosa Council and other councils around the Sunshine Coast Council included, this is money from the federal government, from the National Bushfire Recovery Agency, which was set up by the federal government. The Mayor, Mark Jamieson of Sunshine Coast Council, in his words, said it came out of the blue. What was it like for Noosa Council? Was it a surprise?
Absolutely. The CEO received a phone call and was told that within 2 days we would have $1 million in the bank, thanks to the largesse of the federal government. And of course, we are still getting our head around how best to apply that. We will be making approaches to the impacted communities of Peregian, Koroiba, Noosa North Shore, etc., to find out what their ideas are. There are some constraints around it, and we're still getting our head around how flexible those constraints are. For example, the intention, according to the federal government, is that it be used for repairing public infrastructure, building community capacity, and not necessarily better fire preparedness. Now, we would like to actually use some of the money to make those communities more fire prepared. We don't know yet whether they will be accepting of that. We've got 3 months to put together a program for the spending of the funds, and then we have to account for the spending in a year's time. So there's a good deal of work going on at the moment. There's a lot of staff running around, and we're drawing up a list of priorities of how the money might best be spent, and then we'll need to run that past the federal government.
What can people expect in terms of how best they can feedback to Noosa Council about how they would like to see that money spent, Mayor?
Look, everyone's full of ideas, but not always are the ideas going to be in alignment with the parameters that we've been given for the spending of the money. But we're more than happy to field anyone's ideas, and people can write to mail@noosa.qld.gov.au now and throw ideas at us. That's fine. Happy to listen to any suggestions right now while we develop our own internal concept of how we might best use the money.
So this could be anything from helping people who have been impacted by the fires, displaced, even, say, small businesses in the area who may have had some kind of impact as well, or that's all up for discussion at the moment?
Well, I don't think we can spend the money, which is public money, on individual businesses that support individual businesses, but we can spend it in a way that might support our business community, for example. The Peregian community was impacted, the Tewantin business community was impacted. If there are things that we can do that help support those communities per se, rather than an individual business, then yes, we'd be happy to listen.
1300 903 222 is the number. The Mayor of Noosa is here, Tony Wellington. My name's Tim Wong Si. If you'd like to speak to the Mayor, he's here to answer your questions. 1300 903 222 is the number. When we talk about Noosa Council and it responding to, say, something like a Peregian fire, which of course we had 3 instances of last year, what it actually looks like in the thick of things. You've talked about local government needing to be better resourced during those times because you might be, talking to us here on the radio, for example, or you might be fielding information from the experts. What kind of change are you talking about there in terms of how Noosa Council is resourced and staffed while they're tending to an emergency?
Well, what we discovered, of course, was that with those rolling emergencies from, the first 2 fires at Peregian to the North Shore, Tiwa, Koroiba, etc., and then back again on the North Shore, all of our disaster management team are staff of council who were taken away from their other duties. Our local disaster controller is the director of infrastructure, and of course I'm taken away from my regular duties too. That has an enormous ongoing impact on council because for weeks on end people were taken away from their regular work, which couldn't happen, and quite rightly dedicating themselves to the welfare of the community, which is fantastic, and the staff volunteer for that effort. But nevertheless, it does slow down the process of council's general workings and operations. In some ways, I think that maybe local government, which is right at the forefront, at the fire front, if you like, of these sort of events, may need to be better resourced into the future so that we are not pulling so many people away from their regular jobs, particularly in terms of disaster control.
The Mayor of Noosa is here on ABC Sunshine Coast. This has been a very big issue. We had fires starting as, obviously the first one we had in September of last year, and we had some after that. We've had national bushfires around the country with levels of severity which we know about. When it comes to your priorities of what you want to focus on between now and the local government elections and what you want people to know, where do you see this in your priority list of things that you'd like to achieve?
Oh, look, I think, it's obviously on people's mind at the moment, so it's got a bit of sort of zeitgeist. But it is something that council takes seriously. Of course, we have a disaster management centre, and what's been proven through these fires is that we can respond effectively and quickly, particularly in terms of setting up recovery centres. We moved 8,000 people out of Tewantin and had recovery centres up and ready in 2 hours. So our preparedness level is fantastic. In terms of the debate leading up to the election, I'm sure because it's a zeitgeist issue, people will want to buy into it, but we also have to be realistic about the capacity and also understand where responsibilities lie between state, federal, local government and the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services.
I've seen people talk about the kinds of things that need to change in light of the fires that we've seen locally here in our area, and you've talked about the need for council to act on climate change, given what we've seen this bushfire season. If we look at the 3 Peregian fires that we had towards the end of last year, the authorities have talked about how they're treating all of those fires as suspicious. How does that inform council's fire prevention plan in any way?
Oh, it means that we simply have to be prepared for anywhere for fires to occur. and not necessarily by natural causes. And we know that when you get extreme conditions or catastrophic conditions, for some reason that inspires people who have some sort of mental problems maybe to want to light fires. So obviously we're on our toes as soon as those conditions arise, and we have to be prepared to act within an instant. But, we're not police, so...
That's what I was about to say.
And we don't do the investigations.
Yeah.
Queensland Fire and Emergency Service do the investigations. The police look after the culprits as they're, unearthed. That's out of council's jurisdiction.
Do you think it's something that council need to further investigate, given what we've seen already about what they can do, but say haven't had a need to do it in the past, for example, Mayor?
I'm not sure that we can encroach upon the work of the Queensland Police Service, because it would be outside the legislative authority within the Local Government Act for us to do anything that even replicates policing in that way. But I think there is an education role that council can play, and we are working on that as well. I think that we need parents to be able to teach their children to be fire safe, to understand the gravity of fires, particularly in the new climate conditions that we look like facing.
When we go through those times, we hear some strong language from people in the community, even people, the authorities having to deal with, you hear those words, we're in this situation again and we have to evacuate again and things like that. Personally, for you as Mayor, what is that like for you to be able to have to witness and go through?
Oh, look, I mean, it's emotionally wrenching. I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. Each time when we've received the call that we have an out-of-control fire and it looks like we're going to be evacuating people, my first response is an emotional response. I take the call, I walk into the bathroom and have a cry for 30 seconds. I walk out, I take a deep breath, and then I'm just focused. And accepting, kind of acknowledging the emotional impact first puts it out of the way, and then I can be a bit more intellectual, a bit more cerebral about it. And I've gotten that emotion out of the way, and then I can concentrate on my job. Maybe some people see that as a weakness, I don't know. But it seems to me that's the only way that I personally can handle it. And it's worked for me. So, but what I'm saying is it's much harder for me talking about it now. Afterwards, I get very emotional than it was during the event, because during the event I'm so focused on what I'm doing, getting the messaging out, relaying information, make sure people are safe, etc. You have so much to do that you don't have time to kind of acknowledge the emotion. And I think the same thing's true for people who are in the event. It's afterwards that the emotion really starts to hit them. And I know there are people even now that are seriously suffering as a result of the trauma of those events. And thankfully our community services staff are still helping.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. I mean, because we know when people hear it from you, it's information, it's here's the evacuation centre, this is open, this and this, but to know, I mean, we're all human, aren't we?
That's right, absolutely. Human. I'm not an automaton.
We all love where we live, and it's pretty powerful stuff. Is it when you take that phone call and you hear that there's a fire, is it the emotion of that kind of thing, that this is the place that I love and we're having such a freak of nature like fire threatening it?
Absolutely. It's concern for residents who may be impacted. When you get that call, there's always the possibility that there's going to be loss of life, but you also know that the environment's getting a hammering, wildlife's getting a hammering. These are called disasters for a reason, and lately they've been called unprecedented for a reason, because they really are.
It's 7 minutes to 10. This is ABC Sunshine Coast. The Mayor of Noosa, Tony Wellington, is here. My name's Tim Wong Si. Let's change tack slightly and talk about something that was discussed at the latest council meeting. This is to do with a population cap, for want of a better term, for Noosa. We've talked about that. Is Noosa being overloved? Is there a set number of people that should be able to come into the area, et cetera, et cetera? The Sustainable Tourism Reference Group was set up by council. This is 14 groups and associations from the Noosa Shire. They presented a report which...
the report was presented by me. I wrote the report, so it didn't come from the STSRG. It was me reporting back to council about the work of the Sustainable Tourism Stakeholder Reference Group.
So what kind of update can you provide as to how things are going there and investigations into the Noosa Shire as to what should be done in the future with that regard?
Yeah, look, it's been an interesting process. We've met on a sporadic basis over almost 2 years now. And as you say, the group is 14 key peak bodies that include business representative, environment representative and resident representative groups, plus Tourism Noosa and Noosa Council, sitting around the table dealing with issues about tourism, its impact, its environmental impact, the benefits from tourism, the impact of events, the impact on transport, etc., trying to come up with some sort of set of solutions that we can all agree on. It's been an interesting process. In the last 6 months or so, we've been endeavouring to come up with a sort of accord, which is a statement, if you like, that we can all agree to, but we haven't actually been able to sign off on that yet. So what's been interesting is that around the table we have quite disparate approaches, different vested interests, if you like, towards tourism between resident, environment and business groups, but everyone is willing to listen and everyone's willing to participate, so that's been fantastic. I'm not aware in the history of Noosa that we've ever pulled together this sort of body to be able to deal with something as key to Noosa's future as how to derive sustainability in our tourism sector, and that's fundamentally what it's about. In the meantime, I'm pleased to say that, in part inspired by this group, Tourism Noosa is really changing from being simply a destination marketing organisation to a destination management organisation. They're now the first, I believe, destination organisation in Australia to have a full-time sustainability officer, and they're introducing all sorts of wonderful initiatives like Trees for Tourism, and they're helping with plastic-free Noosa, etc. So there's a commitment there for Noosa to be a sustainable destination. We know that visitors more and more want to travel sustainably. We're trying to offer that product, but of course there will always be differing opinions as to how and where sustainable tourism should be.
That is the big question.
It is. We just hit 1.1 billion in the last year for tourism benefits, flow-on tourism funds going into the Noosa economy. 1.1 billion. We've never cracked $1 billion before, so it's going well. And I have to say that's on the back of a GRP for Noosa that's $3 billion compared with the state's minus 0.3, so 0.3%. Our is $3 billion. It's also growing by 3% annually for the last 2 years. Lots of threes in there. But the fact is that Noosa economy is growing by 3% and the state is going backwards. It's fantastic.
Time's going to get us, Mayor, but just before we go, there's this report that you're talking about here mentions a pilot survey to determine the acceptable number of visitors to Noosa. So that's, to people's minds when they first hear that, they think about a rigid number of this is the cutoff and this is okay. Is that something that people can expect to hear about in terms of numbers that the council is thinking about there?
It's not quite that simple. The issue has been raised in the group as to whether we should do an acceptable limit study. And acceptable limit studies are carried out right around the world to determine what the ideal carrying capacity for tourists are in an area. It's easier if you've got a national park with one road in and out, or you've got an area like Cinque Terre where you've only got a couple of means of getting in and out. It's easy where you've got tickets being sold like, at a cathedral or something. But it's much harder when it's porous. Nevertheless, I understand that Noosa Parks Association are carrying out their own acceptable limit study at the moment. It'll be interesting to see what sort of figures they come up with. And what this means is you actually have to survey visitors to find out whether they're happy, whether they find the place too crowded. You also have to find out what residents want, whether they're happy with in terms of access, and then juggle all those elements to determine what the ideal capacity is. Having determined what that capacity is, you then have the harder question, which is how do we actually ensure that that capacity is met and not exceeded? That's the really hard question.
Just before you go, Mayor, something we've been talking about this morning, an incredible photo of that landslip or sinkhole, whatever people want to call it, at Tingira Crescent at Sunshine Beach. So what's the latest with that as of this morning? Can you tell us?
Yeah, so the geotech experts were in there yesterday on Sunday looking at it. This is a case where an extreme rain event on Saturday night caused the sand to move, and apparently some drainage, stormwater drain and a mains were also impacted, which made matters worse. We're going to have a specialised stabilisation crew in there tomorrow. It's all hands on deck at the moment. Tingira Crescent is closed to traffic past that area. I ask people not to go there and sightsee because it's just going to create chaos, and it's not very useful for the local residents who are trying to deal with the problem. But our engineers are hard at it working on the issue.
Good to see you, Mayor. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be here.
The Mayor of Noosa, Tony Wellington, it's 10 o'clock.